Lorraine had trouble walking today. She was walking along the path searching for a free bench. It felt like her legs refused to move today. She was having trouble breathing, and all she could think about was sitting down. She had met her husband while they were in college. They were both people who valued intelligence over appearance. When he proposed, she said yes without a second thought. They were soulmates. They were soon earning well and lived for their happiness, getting whatever they wanted for themselves. Lorraine was pregnant. It wasn't that they didn't want kids, but they weren't planning it yet. They discussed it and decided to wait. Lorraine got an abortion. 7 years later, once they had done more, they decided to have a kid. But because of the abortion, she couldn't have kids anymore. Over time, they accepted that. They filled that void with memories from traveling. Her husband had died 5 years ago. Lorraine was alone. Of course, Lorraine's husband had provided for her in her old age. She lived in a wonderful home in a prestigious neighborhood and had a good amount of money saved up. Her family included her cousin Chloe and her 2 kids, Alice and Brian. They got along well. They helped Chloe financially many times when she complained about not having enough and gave the kids good presents. Lorraine noticed her relationship with Chloe was only about money. She called or showed up only when she needed something. At Lorraine's husband's funeral, Chloe didn't come because she was busy. They only talked on the phone now, and only when Lorraine called. When she got home, Lorraine immediately went to lie down. The next morning, she understood she was feeling worse and that she had a fever. She wasn't feeling better after a couple of days, so she went to the doctor. He gave her medicine. Lorraine started coughing and had chest pain. "You're crazy. You need to go to the hospital," Grace, Lorraine's only friend, told her worriedly. "No, you know how I feel about hospitals," Grace convinced her friend to go back. The doctor said she may have pneumonia and she should go to the hospital. She refused to stay, so the doctor said she needed a nurse who could give her shots and be with her around the house. Grace remembered that Chloe was a nurse and said she should call her. Lorraine didn't want to bother Chloe. "Dear, you know I'm leaving tomorrow, and I'll be gone for 2 weeks. There won't be anyone looking after you," she said with worry. So Grace called Chloe. Grace described the situation and exaggerated Lorraine's condition a bit, so she would come over and help her cousin faster. The doorbell rang the next morning. Chloe, Alice, and Brian were there. "What are you doing here?" Lorraine asked, surprised. "Hey, cuz, you're not happy? We decided to visit. When was the last time we saw each other? 2 years ago?" 2? No, it's been what, 6 years? Why did you decide to visit so suddenly? Lorraine looked at Chloe inquisitively. She tried to make a joke, but Lorraine didn't avert her eyes. Okay. Your friend called and said you were sick and needed help, Chloe admitted. "Well, okay then," Lorraine said quietly, inviting them in. Actually, she was very happy to see Chloe and her niece and nephew, but for some reason it all seemed dishonest and forced. After seeing a mountain of medicine on her bedside table, Chloe threw her hands up. "You're taking all this? Dear, it's just chemicals, and at your age..." "I'll get you on your feet with my own methods," Chloe said, dumping all the medicine in the trash. Chloe gave Lorraine different teas, infusions, and creams all week. Lorraine got even worse. She could barely get out of bed. "Chloe, your treatment is only making me worse. Please call a doctor. I think I need to go to the hospital." "Don't complain. You'll get better soon. Just you wait," she answered. "Please call help," Lorraine repeated, but Chloe acted like she couldn't hear. Lorraine decided to call an ambulance, but she looked around and couldn't find her phone. She tried to get up, but her vision went dark, and she passed out. It was like she was hovering. It was dark. She tried to scream, but her tongue was paralyzed. She tried to run even in the dark, but her legs wouldn't move. Was this the end? Suddenly, there was a weak light in the distance. It was getting closer and brighter. Then she started to hear distant voices. They got clearer, and Lorraine seemed to recognize them. She came to. "I can't do what you're asking. You understand it's a huge risk," an unfamiliar voice repeated. "Doctor, I'm begging you to listen. You can't imagine what kind of person this is. She drove our mother to a nervous breakdown, and she's been torturing us for months. Our life has become hell. If you knew what I'd tell you, what she'd done, you'd be horrified." Lorraine recognized Brian's voice speaking, but what was he talking about? "I understand that people with dementia can be hard to handle, but you realize what you're asking, right? I don't want to go to prison." "Why would you go to prison?" "No one else will know. The old hag has serious pneumonia, had respiratory failure, and is unconscious. If she doesn't wake up, no one will be suspicious," Alice added. "Doctor, we will thank you generously." Brian pulled out a wad of cash and gave it to the doctor. He looked and was interested. "Well then, your aunt is very sick. We'll do everything we can, but this illness and her age, there's no guarantee she'll wake up. I'd like you to come to my office and we'll discuss your aunt's further treatment." "Of course, doctor," Alice said gleefully. Alice and Brian looked at each other and beamed. What in God's name was happening? My sister, niece, and nephew want to kill me? Lorraine suddenly remembered that Chloe didn't refuse to give her medicine and shots and hang IVs for nothing. And she insisted on her methods, but their plan failed. Now they were making a deal with the doctor. Their motives were clear. They knew perfectly well that Lorraine was wealthy, and they were her only inheritors. What should she do? She tried to move, but couldn't. Her hands were tied down. If I told anyone, they wouldn't believe me. Am I going to die tied to a hospital bed, alone and helpless by my own relatives? Jessica sighed, poured herself a cup of coffee, and sat down. She was exhausted. To feed her 2 kids, she had to work extra shifts, and she was worn down. She was used to hardship because she'd had a difficult life. She shuddered and looked at the time. Her break was up, and she had to go. It was her shift to look in on the intensive care unit. Jessica loved them least because she felt horrible for the people about to die that were fighting to live. She went into Lorraine's room. She checked her vitals, set the IV, and got ready to leave. She stopped by the bed to look at the unfortunate old woman inside. Suddenly, Lorraine moved and opened her eyes. That's impossible! You're awake! I'll get the doctor! Lorraine shook her head no and said, Wait, don't. Just stay with me, please. She looked shocked at Lorraine. I feel horrible alone here. Jessica grabbed a chair and sat next to her. It's great that you waked up. Your family will be delighted to hear. Lorraine shook her head. Probably not. What do you mean? Lorraine told her about her relationship with them and what she heard her niece and nephew say to the doctor. Jessica's head was spinning. That can't be. Everyone wants to help you. Your relatives are very worried about you. I understand you wouldn't believe me. No one would. There's nothing I can do here. No one besides them will release me, and there's no one for me to turn to. I realized too late that my relatives were just snakes in the grass. Lorraine's eyes were filling with tears. No matter what happened, I don't think I deserve for these horrible people like my cousin and her kids to dispose of my life. But no one will act for me, so there's nothing for me to do. Jessica talked with Lorraine a little more. Then she went to check on the other rooms. Lorraine's conversation with her wouldn't get out of her head. Jessica believed her. She seemed trustworthy. Also, Lorraine didn't ask Jessica for help, and she didn't insist on it either. She was simply confessing. We should do something. We just can't let this happen, the nurse decided. She knew the doctor well, so she developed a plan. Jessica was nervous but got herself together and went to his office. He invited her in. She put on a sad, almost tragic face, talked about her rounds, and asked if he had any instructions. Sighed and got ready to leave. Are you all right? He asked. Jessica was happy. He fell for it. She apologized 1,000 times and said she understands it's not her business, but she's having a hard time, always working, and just didn't have enough money. She needs more for her 2 kids, and maybe he knew a way she could get some extra money. She was ready to do anything to get her finances in order. She apologized again and said not to pay her any mind and walked towards the door slowly. Jessica, wait, the doctor suddenly said. Are you really ready to do anything? Yes, of course. I'm in a tight spot, and I just don't know how to get out, so I'm ready to do anything, she said confidently. Even something criminal? He clarified. Jessica looked at him curiously and sat, letting him know she was ready to commit a crime. The doctor told her she needed to give a patient medicine that would keep her in a coma. Considering the patient's medical history, it would look natural, and no one would suspect anything. And he promised Jessica a very good reward. Jessica left the office barely keeping herself together. She was shocked that Lorraine was right. With shaky hands, she got her phone out of her pocket, put in a headphone, and turned on the recording. Excellent. She had recorded the whole thing. After her shift, Jessica went directly to the police. The doctor, Chloe, Alice, and Brian were arrested. Lorraine pressed charges against them and provided evidence. They were all sent to prison after the trial. Lorraine got better. The first thing she did when she got home was change her will. She left everything she had to one person, Jessica. When the trial was finished, she invited Jessica over and told her that she would inherit everything now. Jessica was floored and said she'd have to refuse because she didn't deserve it. Listen, this is my final decision. It's all yours, and you can do with it what you wish. Jessica wept. She didn't understand how a stranger could do this. They talked a long time. She kept trying to refuse, but Lorraine wouldn't have it. You earned it. Let's change the topic. A year went by. Lorraine was a truly happy person. Jessica and her kids moved in, and now the house was full of children's screams, laughter, and life. Jessica became like a daughter to Lorraine, and her kids were like grandkids. Lorraine became like a mother to Jessica that she had needed for a long time. They were a real family. Jessica still thought she didn't deserve it, but Lorraine told her every day that she loved them and was happy to spend more of her life among such wonderful, loving people.